Thank you for attending the Access-specific chapter presentation of the Access User Groups. Tonight, Tom Van Stiphout and Kim Young will be talking to us about their approach to troubleshooting, which covers a whole lot of territory in terms of creating an application that you can depend on. Before I turn the time over to them, however, I want to briefly touch on some items of news and updates. I've put these same links into the chat. So if you open the chat, you'll see these links for the Access roadmap. I wanted to talk about that really quickly. I mentioned this because there are two new items on the roadmap that are of interest to most of us, I think. I don't think there's anything really dramatic, but there are definitely improvements that we should be looking forward to. The Monaco framework for SQL Editor is scheduled to roll out starting in September. It will roll out in the current phase. And the modern chart improvements is supposed to start rolling out in August and again in the current channel. So if you haven't visited here, keep an eye on this. Number 2 on my list is the Discord server, and we'll take a few more minutes to talk about the Discord server. This was set up as sort of an organic effort of several people who wanted a more accessible way to engage in conversations with other Access developers. It's called Access Talk, and the link is in the chat. Along with the invitation, you'll need to have a Discord account to join, and there's an invitation that you can respond to be accepted into the group. So you can see that link in the chat. Tomorrow, the first event, and I'm doing air quotes for the event, is scheduled starting. Now it'll be 10 o'clock for me because I'm in the Pacific time zone in the US. For people in England, I think you said it was what, 6 or 7 tomorrow night?
It was 7, it's now 6. It was moved back.
Moved back to 6, and for Kent, it'll be early in the morning, so it may or may not be accessible. But I would encourage you to drop in, get acquainted with how it works, what's going on there, and try to think of ways that you can take advantage of having it. I wanted to point out that we have all of our previous videos on a playlist. So we now have 31, I believe. Tonight will be 32 since I started this chapter. Actually, April of 2021 was our first meeting, so we're just over 3 years. And that then leads me into the final point in my announcements, which is a combination of new and reactivated chapters. So you'll need that invitation to join the Discord server, and the link there for the chat tomorrow is there. Okay, back on track. New and reactivated AUG chapters. The Latino America chapter was recently reactivated. Edgar Olivares is in Mexico City. His first meeting was a 3 weeks ago on JSON, parsing JSON, using JSON to send and receive data. And I was pleasantly surprised because it started out at a fairly introductory level, but I managed to learn some things even there. So I think he did a terrific job, and he will have it hopefully on the Latino Pacific playlist in the near future. Number 2, new chapters. We're looking to start some new chapters. There are several being proposed. The one that seems to be the furthest along in development will be, I don't know, what name are you going to call it, Kent? Kent Gurel has agreed to head up this new chapter and lead it. So can you tell us just in general outline? I know you don't have definitive plans yet, but just what your general plans are going to be.
Well, seeing as how I'm sort of offset from the rest of the world time-wise, I'm in GMT +10. I thought I'd have it around 2 weeks different to this particular meeting, but around the same actual time. So that would be like midday for me on a Friday, or 11 a.m. on a Friday. so that you guys can still attend it, but it's like 2 weeks apart. So at least I know I've got a few people to begin with. Question then is how many people in my time zone are going to be available during what's effectively business hours. So there might be a bit of to and froing and suggestions and what have you to see where we end up at, but that's my initial plan.
Okay, great. I see Steve Chappell is here tonight, so he might be someone you could touch bases with on what will work best there. Steve is in New Zealand, right? And I know at least two other developers who join us from time to time from Australia. So I think we've got
there's Brian Henderson, I think.
Yeah. And
Brian
has joined us several times, and Brett, whose last name escapes me. I'll think of it midway through the meeting and interrupt you, but yeah. So I know there are other people, and I think once the word gets out that there's something available, that we'll pick up. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about is my own plans for the future. Very quickly, I'm coming up on a milestone birth date in the very near future, and I've been thinking a lot about where to go from here. And in conjunction with that, I have been saying for some time that it's about time for us to start recruiting and training our replacements. So that's my plan for the rest of this year, is to recruit and train whoever takes over Access Pacific as the chapter president. My plan is to be able to complete that transition towards the end of 2024. So if you have any thoughts about wanting to try it out, I would encourage you to step up. It has been a wonderful experience. I learned a lot, had some anxious moments and some wonderful moments. And I think it's a good idea, if you have any interest, to maybe step up and stretch yourself a little bit and see where you go. So let me or Juan Soto know. And if you want to reach out to me, I'll give you Juan's contact information. But like I say, my plan is to be replaced in this chapter by the end of 2024. Kim and Tom, if you would like to start, you can introduce your presentation and yourselves, and we're ready to go. Thank you.
All right. All right. We can play the rest later if you like. We are going to be talking about troubleshooting today. I'm here from Phoenix, Arizona, and my co-presenter, Kim Young, is in the Chicago area. And we have been thinking about troubleshooting, what that means. The general context is you're getting a phone call from a customer says, something bad is going on. I got a message on the screen that I don't understand, or it's even worse than that. And so we're going to be talking about some of what you would do. What are the next steps when something happens, as well as a little bit further in the presentation, what can you do ahead of time to prepare for that eventuality? If your application is more prepared, you'll probably do better. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you for the first slide.
Okay. So first, we can get a number of different kind of errors. You're all familiar with this, but we thought we'd mention what they are. So clockwise, the first error is an AccDB unhandled error. The next error we see in the center, the error 11 division by 0, is MsgBox error number, error description. Then we see the types of errors that we produce in Northwind and how we handle them there, which is available to anyone to take and use as a template to get themselves started with error handling. And then at the bottom, we have an AccDE unhandled error. And you can see that the unhandled errors look very different depending on where they were sourced from. So next slide, Tom. Okay, so what kind of error is this? Because this is something new. This is from VB Watchdog. For those of you that are not familiar with it, you can customize it. What we see here at the top is what your end user would see. What you see to the right is what you would see as a developer. I use this extensively. I am a huge proponent of it. It also writes out all of your errors to for you to get back to them, and then you can see the kind of text that it produces. It tells you where the errors happen. I'm happy to talk at the end more about this tool. It's $215. It's a one-time fee. I am not compensated by them. They don't ask me to do this. I do this because I can't imagine not having it. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants after this session about why. So next, what kind of error is this? So what we're looking at is an ODBC error, which occurred. BB error 3146, ODBC called failed. So where do you see that? We want to look where the Windows crash reported that this happened, because this isn't really you. This is a failure with the ODBC connection and access. So how do you begin to debug it? So up in the right-hand side here, you can see that you go to Start, Event Viewer, Custom Views, Administrative Events, and you get all kinds of detail here about that particular error. And Tom, my co-presenter, has done a nice write-up about the ODBC errors, and he's listed the link there that you can go to and read about where those are. Tom, is that available right now, or do you want to show that later?
I think we can show that later. One thing I did want to point out is about that message in the upper left-hand corner, faulting application msaccess.exe, but keep reading. Sometimes there's very good information here. On the second line, the faulting module name is subtimer6.dll. And as a developer, this means something to me. This is a DLL that I added to my application, and apparently it is the one that is crashing, or it is my code that's not properly interacting with this DLL and is then causing that DLL to crash, and Windows gets a general protection fault, we used to call that, and it writes that to the event viewer. And so this is one of those things that you can do when unexpected application termination happens. You're not just thinking about, what is my error logging doing? For example, VB Watchdog or any of your own error handling on error go-to would not have caught this particular level of crash, but the event viewer will. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes there's good information here that leads you in the vicinity of where the problem might exist. The ODBC error, I just want to say that there is a lot more information available than error 3146. Was that the number? And you can actually see that here, that there is much more detailed information. Like in this particular case, there was an update statement that violates a check constraint. That is the name of the check constraint, and it happens in this database and this table. So that gives you a lot more detailed information about where the error occurred. And when you write your own error handler, this is the kind of information that you can retrieve if you iterate over the errors collection. And this link here, one of my articles, odbcerrors.htm, it talks more in detail about how you get these error messages and how you can then translate them so that they are more palatable for your end users, because this is, of course, way too technical for standard users. Next, I want to talk a little bit about startup time. So it's Monday morning, people come back in the office, fire up the application, and there's trouble. It worked just fine on Friday, but it doesn't work now. Here on the left is actually somebody took this with their cell phone and said, this is what's happening, an error while reconnecting the K drive to / server name. That turned out to be an error that was related just to this one customer. In this particular case, their server was offline. The user couldn't use their application because the backend was on the server. On the right-hand side, this also happened. I believe this was on a Tuesday. And yesterday it was fine. Today it is not. Refresh link has started failing with error so-and-so. And let's take a little bit of a closer look at this. So on the one hand, I want you to take away that things can happen even if they didn't happen yesterday, even if this application is very well tested. Things can just happen, and it's a good idea to be prepared for that. The other thing that I want to point out here is that this particular individual, they've posted this message in a forum, which is exactly the thing that we want you to do. Is if there is something that is not of the kind here on the left-hand side, but here on the right-hand side, something that appears to be inside of your application that didn't happen yesterday, that is something that perhaps other people in the community have seen as well. Refresh link. We use that every time that we start the application. This application has been running for 5 years without this problem. All of a sudden today it is a problem. That's not because of my line of code, right? Something else has happened. And so what this person did very smartly, they went to a community forum and posted this message. And they added here in just a few lines, they added a lot of detail about what exactly was the problem. The error number, the error message, the fact that it was a split access database, 32 bits, this exact build, current channel. All of this information is super important. You know, this channel was updated yesterday. Before that, I think I was on a different version. I mean, he's basically diagnosing the problem here, right? So Microsoft released a new version in current channel and all hell broke loose. Posting a message like this, and you're not the only one doing that. Other people are doing that too. And people like myself and others are looking at the forums and seeing what's being posted and trying to respond to that. Before you know it, sometimes within minutes, but certainly within hours, the problem has been identified and usually a workaround has been offered as well. And other websites such as the one by Carl Donnerbauer, let's just take a quick look at that one, will also then post these bug reports as well as the workarounds. In-string function failed, refresh links failed, that's the same one, SQL Server is slow, etc., semicolon problem. And these websites are very well indexed. They will usually be towards the top of a search engine. If you were to search for refresh link and a few other keywords, you'd probably be able to, again, within hours of it happening, be able to find a workaround. So, of course, this is not the only thing that you need to do. You also need to be able to roll back. In a situation like this person knows that they were upgraded to version 23.12, and they want to go back to 23.11. Well, this is not the time to go Google for that and say, what are the steps? I wonder how this works. As a professional developer, this is one of the things that you want to be able to anticipate and already have the scripts close by, because you know that that will happen eventually. And this is not a time for experimentation. Maybe this company is using a somewhat unusual version of Office. Perhaps it is a perpetual license versus a monthly license, and they work a little bit different. There could be all kinds of reasons why the first result from a search engine is not going to work for you. So if there's a quiet day when not much is going on, this is one of the things I would want you to do. Say, hey, let's try to roll back. Let's see if that actually works. And how do we then push that out to the rest of the organization? Are we talking about 5 users or 100? Right.
Something I was going to add to that is the same is true for SQL Server. If you're taking SQL Server backups and you are all happy with that and you think that's working great, you need to practice actually doing the restore.
Yeah.
Does the restore work? How is it expected? So I was working for a company and we had a software as a service platform. We went through that restore process on a secondary server every single Friday, because we had to be up 24/7 and you had to make sure that the backup you had was good And could you restore it? Because the last thing you want to do is be learning how to do that when you need it. You're the fireman. You're not supposed to be saying, well, I can't get to the fire right now because I have to get all of my hoses and axes and all of the things that they put on the truck organized now. You need to be prepared. And when, in fact, the emergency does strike, your team is ready, however big that is, you and 5 other people. And you go through this process and you're much calmer and everybody has a better day because you've done it so many times you could do it with your eyes closed. So you need to practice and prepare yourself for when something bad happens. And hopefully it'll be like Garf in the movie when he says, well, the plane already crashed into the house, so we can buy this one because that's not going to happen again. So you want to be prepared.
Okay, thank you for that. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about when a problem has happened. You have an error message on the screen. There is the application is not responding properly. A couple of other things that we want you to think about. Number one is like the Hippocratic oath, do no harm. First, do no harm. And so you begin with making backups. Something bad has happened. I want a backup of the backend. I want to see if there was a backend, if there was a backup made last night. I can tell someone, go figure that out. I don't have time for that right now, but I want someone to be thinking about when was the last good backup made, because the backup that I'm making right this moment could already be bad. So we want to know how bad the situation is. And then depending on also what it is you are running with, most of the time we'll be running with an AccDE, but if this is an AccDB situation, for example, it could be an in-house application where the source code really doesn't have to be protected. At my company, Kinetic IT, we are actually running a few Access applications that way. One of the things you can do is control break. And if you had a runtime error on the screen, you will break into the code and see what's going on. So that can always be your friend if you are in an accDB environment. The other idea is, since we, of course, are deployed with a split database, with a backend and a front end, if the front end is misbehaving, delete it. Grab a new fresh copy from the server, and we don't need to go figure out why this front end is corrupt. But I can tell you that at least 10% of the cases, just refreshing the front end solves the problem, whether it's an accDB or an accDE. That can always be a tool. Another really good tool to think about is Task Manager. If you have hidden instances of Access running, or perhaps you're doing some Excel automation and you have hidden instances of Excel running, you don't see them on the desktop, but you can see them in Task Manager, in the Details tab especially, and you can just delete them from there. Sometimes that solves your problem. The next point that I want to point out is even if you're in an accDE environment and you think, well, there's no source code here, I will demo to you here in a minute that you still have options. There are things you can do in an accDE environment that I will be showing you. And then the last point that I already made on the previous slide is, let's find out what is the reproducible scenario here. And if we are going to be posting, let's make sure that we have, in a few strong sentences, have all the information that other people will need to be able to understand what your problem is. So I want to look at my first demo here. We have the Northwind 2.0 Developer Edition with a few additions. And one of the first things I want to do, and yes, I'll be jumping back and forth a little bit between accDB and accDE. I'll try to point it out to you. Right now, it's pretty clear. We are looking at code here. So this is an accDB. If we are trying to debug something, I want to point out a few things that perhaps not everybody knows. Of course, we know about setting breakpoints and being able to step through our code. There are a few other things that can be very helpful that I just want to point out. One is, I used it just the other day, a watch window, and then add a watch. And in my particular case, I wanted to see where this global variable was being changed. That variable is used in a lot of different places, and I wasn't sure where it was being changed. So I entered my expression, and I said all procedures, all objects, all modules, and break when it changes. And so within a minute or two, I had the exact line of code where this problem happened. And so it really helped me from not having to set breakpoints everywhere where we see, global variable equals. This essentially does the same thing for you. It essentially sets breakpoints everywhere and looks for that expression to change, not this literal expression. So that's one. The other one that's kind of important, it's also in the same area here under view, that is the call stack. I think most people know this, that functions can call other functions, and then when that other function returns, we are back in the previous function. And so that sets up a call stack. That is how software works. And you can see them, and you can step into them. So you can double click on another line and inspect what is going on here. So this stack frame, it's called, is now available to you, and you can hover over stuff just like you always can. And you cannot edit and continue. You cannot change this line of code. It's not that powerful. But it is kind of nice that you can see all the stack frames and be able to understand where we were coming from. Control L is the keystroke. Okay. So why are we in this string to dictionary function? Because we are opening a new form. Okay, so that's good enough for this. Let me now switch to accde by actually literally, as soon as this recovers, save as. Hello. Save as. And let's close the accdb and go to the accde. And open a form, Alt F11. As we already said, there's no code here. That's indeed too bad. There's nothing there. However, the immediate window is still available to you. And so you can do things like question mark. So very quickly, you can inspect some things about this form, and that is very helpful. The other thing that you can do is, this is the part about being prepared for if something bad is to happen, is I know my code, and I know that I added some debugging tools that are not part of the main line of the application, but they are there for cases such as this, where we have a form that's not behaving properly, and I just want to know more about it while it is running, because I have the exact scenario here on the screen. It's perhaps hard to reproduce, and so I can now step in and say things like, this is one of my screen.active form, and passing that into my function dump form. And what it does is it uses the access object model to iterate over the active form and spit out information about it. What is the name of the form? What is its caption? Is it visible? What is its window handle, etc., etc.? What is the record source? Order ID equals 53. Yeah, I kind of expected that. Allow edits. And of course, you can change this dump form function for your own purposes, and maybe in some applications it's a little different than in others. And then it continues with looking at each of the controls on that form and spitting out information about it. And in some cases, such as, for example, if there is a label, then we can also find out what the parent control is. In this particular case, there is no parent control, but in some other cases, you can see that the label is associated with, here is an example. Here's a label that's associated with order status name. That is the text box that this label belongs to. And so you can, with a few little helper functions, you can return that kind of information. So you can quickly see how this application is currently built. Perhaps it's a dynamic form that changes based on circumstances. So this is not all necessarily available at design time, right? So that's dump form, very, very good one. Second scenario is the user, this is an innocent user, knows a little bit about queries, and did a query looking for all records where the node is test. And this record 53 was not being returned. So what we can do is use another dump function. And we are now dumping the individual ASCII characters of the text in this active control. I set focus there. And now you can see that these are the ASCII values, and here's the character representation. So now you can see it's HTML, it's rich text, div, the word test, a break, ASCII 13 and ASCII 10, those are the characters returned on line feed, and then the end of the div. So now you can explain to the customer why they didn't see this record when they said where nodes equals test. So of course, this comes in handy in all kinds of situations where you might have embedded character returns or character return line feeds. Sometimes you need to know, or there's a tab control or an ASCII 0, or there's all kinds of scenarios where it's handy to have a function like this available while the application is running so that you can inspect something. Last one that I will show, this is also going to be in the download that will be made available, is DumpRecordset. Oops, records. There's no intelligence. If I do dump record SE control spacebar, nothing. That is security, I'm guessing. Screen.activeform.recordset clone. And then do you see the second argument? Current record only is false. It's good enough. And then the third argument is kind of nice. The colon \1. Let's do junk. Folder 1. So let's take this off. No current record. Interesting. Did not expect that. I think focus was not where I expected it to be. Okay. Normally speaking, what happens is it would look at the underlying record set of this form. I will debug that after the meeting and see why that didn't work while it did an hour ago. Yes?
Tom, I believe, you can check this later, I believe that screen.activeform, when you're in the debugger, will be the debugger's screen active form. It only works if you have that running in the background so that the access can be the foreground, then it can work. If you've got it in the foreground, it's not going to recognize the access bit, the window.
Let's try this.
That would have the same problem, of course.
Well, we saw earlier that active control did work right here.
All right, okay.
So that's why I guess that's
sure.
Okay, moving right on. Post message, I talked about that. So this is a combination of being able to inspect things at runtime, but really enhancing that with some additional functionality that you would probably put in every application of yours. so that if it is ever necessary, you have some of these at your disposal. Another one that's not included here that I have in my professional applications is, for example, dump references, where we very carefully walk the references collection and make sure that it works even if there is an is broken one among them, and spit out as much information as possible about each reference, so that you, again, you can understand if there is a broken reference or if there's a wrong version number. Having those things available just makes debugging a lot nicer, and makes it so that when everyone is panicky and things don't work, that you already have a great set of tools available, and it instills confidence in the customer that, you know, you're coming to this job prepared. So that's what I want you to take away from it. Kim.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about what you can do at design time. So from a more offense position to prepare yourself for bad things that are going to happen. So first, you want to practice defensive programming. It's kind of a big phrase. There's a lot out there, a lot of things it encompasses. For this particular presentation, when I say that, I'm talking about using an approach where the programmer or the developer assumes they are capable of making mistakes, and they want to apply best practices to produce a higher rate, a higher quality of code. So you should assume that problems are going to happen. You're going to have mistakes in your code. It's just inevitable. And you do everything you can to capture them, handle them gracefully, and know what to do with them. So a little bit earlier, Tom shared an example of everything was working on Friday when we left, and when we came back on Monday, nothing's working now. What happened? This is an error that was caused outside of your application. Something happened because you didn't change anything about your application. So you need to think about, what can I do in advance? What things should I talk about in advance? And as an organization, should we decide how much risk am I willing to take in terms of getting updates from Microsoft? Do we need what comes out in the monthly channel? Or if we took, semi-annual or quarterly, or however often we were going to do it, what's the acceptable risk level to us? And then you make a decision and you say, okay, we're not going to be on the monthly channel. We're going to do semi-annually. But doing semi-annually doesn't mean you wait until it shows up and then you start testing. You know what's going to be coming. So if you can, you need to get your organization to allow you to have a POC machine, a proof of concept, where you start doing those downloads and you see how your application behaves and what's happening and what are the issues. And then you watch to see, are they being resolved? Because maybe something you think isn't a bug, Microsoft is going to say that's not a bug. We told you about it. And Tom's going to talk about that very shortly, I think in the next slide or two. The other thing we want to talk about is error handling. You have to have error handling. So how is that going to work, and what are you going to do? Do you need to do logging? Are you tracking fields? Do you know what the stack looks like? How would you answer, how will you do this? So I've had a couple of interesting things. I had to put tracking in on who's clicking what buttons and what are they actually using in the application. So the application has been live for a very long time, many, many years, decades, if I'm thinking about it. There's so many reports. So every time they want to change something and they ask me to do that, I have to look and go, okay, what are all the reports that are going to potentially be impacted by the change they're making? And they go, does anybody even run this report? Like, who's running this report? Why is it still here? So we decided to track who's running what reports and when are they running them, how often. Because here's an interesting one. We have some reports that the president of the company is the only person who runs it. And when he runs it, it better be wickedly fast because he's the guy at the top. So it doesn't matter that he may not run it for 2 years. When he wants to run it, it better work. So that's on the list of, It doesn't matter that we only have one person running it. We're keeping this report because it's his report. But you may say, yeah, here we have this report. Nobody's run it in more than a year. And we're tracking over a year because different accounting cycles happen, things happen, but we're going to track them. So we're writing it out to a table. So you need to think about, what do I want to log? How do I want to log it? Do I want to be sure to, I want to try to log it to a table, but I may not have a connection to the back end. So first thing I should do is maybe write out a text file so that I have the access to that if an error happens. Counting on the fact that your user is going to tell you that the screen popped up and told them there was an error, I find a lot of times that doesn't happen. So I have, because I use VB Watchdog, all my errors get written out for each of my users. And I saw one and thought, wow, what are all these errors? Why didn't you tell me you were having errors? Well, it's my fault. I know you keep telling me that I need to do it like this, but I keep doing it another way. It was my fault. I didn't tell you. And it's like, well, it kind of is my fault, because if you consistently don't want to use the application, or you're not using the application the way we have given it to you, we need to give you an application that works logically about how you think about doing this task. So even though the error was yes, the user was doing something, we kept saying, don't do it that way, do it like this, they still kept doing that. So there's a reason. And that was an indicator to me that I needed to meet with them and say, okay, so is this not working for you? What would be better? Why does this seem awkward? Another thing is your deployment procedure. Do you have a deployment procedure? How do you check and confirm that you're moving everything you thought? I recently took over a project, and I'm going to talk about that some at the end, for numerous reasons, all of which made sense at the time. They have multiple back ends. Well, we're making back end changes. So how do I make sure that the code and the layouts of the table and the relationships and whatever referential integrity you might have, how do I ensure that all of those are the same? Because I inherited this, I'm not counting on the fact that somebody else made sure they remained in sync. I don't even trust myself to believe they're in sync, that I did all the steps in each one of them in the proper order, and that everything I expect is there. So you have to become very comfortable, I think, with the artifacts within Access, whether it's the front end or the back end. How do you dump them out so that you can compare and go, yes, A and B are the same. Oh, B doesn't have this relationship. I need to get that relationship set up. How did that one get missed? Let me look at the script that I'm running. Oh, I noticed the table here has a different name. I didn't know that. So these are things that you will have to think about. And if you do them ahead of time, and if you've written scripts to dump out relationships, to spit out tables, and we have one in the sample database, Tom, that we're going to show you. And I'm going to share a few things with you about my own philosophy. So let's go to the first window and look at what's in the object browser for screens and forms. So I have some tables, and I've put them at the top here. They start with APP underscore, and then there's abbreviation, parameters for the back end. I have a table called table field and table name. I name those that way in order to be a clue to myself and to anyone who comes. These are things and data that is used by the application. This is not data that the user is entering. I want them to be segregated and really obvious, because what if I'm on vacation and someone else has to try to troubleshoot this? Okay, well, what are these app tables? They're right in the front. A lot of times you'll have a table that has queries in it because you're using this form in a multi-use way. It's a selection form, and you're asking them criteria to run a report. So the queries change depending on what reports you're running and what criteria you're asking for, and you want to drive that out of a table. This is a way that I set this up and am consistent. And one of the things is abbreviations. Whatever abbreviations I use, and if you open those, I start to list them there. So you know when it says PQRY, what am I talking about? It's a parameter-driven query as opposed to a standard query. A lot of people are not familiar with those parameter queries where you define them right within the query that says parameter, you name them, you say the type, and then you have the statement and where they're used. To draw that to their attention that this is something different. BE is back end, FE is front end. Most of us use those, but people use abbreviations that I don't necessarily understand when I look at their code because they're not in my normal sphere of things that I use. App table field, Tom, if you want to open that. Okay, so I create this with every deployment that I do, and I keep it. And it's a table. It contains all the information about the fields contained within a table. What type are they? Are they required? What is their size? And I know we have Crystal here. She does a bunch of great documentation. There are tools that are available that help you do that, but I need it in a one sheet. I can put it in Excel. I can take the second Excel from the previous one, put them together and say, what changed? Did something change in one of these tables and we missed something that was supposed to happen, or how it worked? Just in the last 2 days, I was working with a customer who I took over this application from, said, it's really hard because these names are much longer than this and I can't enter all the data that I want. I took this, copied this data into Excel for only the fields that were defined as text and told them how big they were and said, which ones do you want to make bigger? And then from Excel, I actually create the VBA to alter all the fields, to change the text sizes to the text they wanted. I'll show you how we create that if you want to look at the modules, Tom. So it'll be under BAS. So if you notice, that has a different naming convention because this is code that isn't about necessarily making the application run. It's code that's used.
Let me switch to the AccDB.
Okay.
I was still running the AccDB right here.
So here, I populate, clean out, and make the table. I do this with each deployment. I keep it from one deployment to the next so that we can say, when did we add whatever field? When did we start tracking this? I can just go back to those Excel spreadsheets very quickly and go, okay, we did it back in the December release or the release we did last October, whatever it happens to be. This code here, for those who don't normally work with it, can show how we are working with the fields within the table definitions and getting some descriptions. If you scroll down a little further, Tom, there's also a module in here called field name, DAO. So I take, and I want it to print in English, the type. So I've done this translation. I do it for SQL Server. If I have a SQL Server backend and I'm looking at those, what are their data types, and then what do I want to say it is in when I report it or keep it or manage it from a English perspective rather than a tech perspective. What do these mean? So when I say learning to work with all of those artifacts, if you don't do that already, I very strongly would recommend to anyone that you pick one topic a month and you maybe spend one lunch hour per week in which you learn about what's in the table relations. What is that about? What can I get out about my form? How do I loop through the controls? How do I find out about properties, queries? How do I get them out? How do I get them out in English? How do I export them? And as you learn these things, you will build your repertoire, because when things go bad, you need to already know how to do this. You can't be figuring these sorts of things out in the middle of the fire. You need to be ready. So start to prepare yourself, and you'll learn a bunch of really interesting things. And you go, oh, I didn't know you could do that. So here's one of them that I just learned. So I like and want my primary key to be the first column in the table. And I want it to be at ordinal position 0. And if you don't know about ordinal positions, you'll learn about it when you start to do this. Because in this application that I inherited, they converted something from an old Fox Pro app, and I'm going to guess a DB2 backend database or something else. Every single field name is 8 characters, not 1 character more. And 4 of those characters are a prefix for the table that it belongs in with an underscore. So every field out of 100 has only 4 letter alphabetic characters that are supposed to tell me what it is. I have no idea how to translate that. I don't know what their abbreviations were or what the standard was. So by using code like Tom showed, where we find out what the label is, well, if I get the label from the screen, I can see what it says when the user is looking at it for me. So I then dump those into a table just like this that I keep on a spreadsheet next to me. So when the user says, well, you know, when I look at this field on the screen, I think this is wrong. And I'm like, okay, so what field would that be in the data? I have a way to look at it. So these things are very important to help you along the way. So learn about those artifacts and share what you know. The other thing that was interesting about ordinal position is you can have, which I was surprised, and I pinged Tom and said, I can't believe this is true. You can have 3 fields if you choose to change the ordinal position, which you can change, all with the same number. So I wanted the primary key to be at the top and the timestamp, when it was created, by who, when it was modified, and by who, always to be at the bottom. So I set them up and I started them with 255 to make all those timestamps appear at the bottom. And I had multiples in there with 255. I'm like, how can the ordinal position repeat? It does. Until you actually open it through the GUI in design view and either move one of the fields or save them, they don't get reordered, so they're sequential. If you were to rerun my code again, you would see that there had been numbers that were listed as 255 as the ordinal position, the last position in the table. So I can only infer, because I don't know for sure what Access does on the back end that I can't see or don't have access to, is that the ordinal position is really utilized by the GUI when it shows you the data, when you see the fields in design view in the table. It's not about physical storage where the ordinal position is. It's actually, I think, about the GUI. So I've inferred that. I don't know that for sure, but it's the only explanation I can come up with that makes sense. So the last thing I'm going to say on this, and then I'm going to have Tom talk about one of them, is so the project I inherited had templates. I was like, oh, great. So they have all these form templates. This is good. And I started to look, and there was a lot of very verbose code in the template. And I'm like, well, is this code in every form? Yep, if it is, and I'll talk to you more about what it did. I believe in a very strong three-tier development concept. Data is data. The code is where the business logic goes, and then the user interface is very lean. It's not driving processes. It's not telling me how things work, but that's not how everyone else does it. That's how I like it to be done. In this project, they were using tags excessively. I wasn't looking for tags. I'm like, what is this code about? Where is this? So I'm going to talk to you more about that later. But if you're doing something, the same thing in 30 forms, it shouldn't be in 30 forms. You should create a module and pass the form to the module so that when you want to change it or understand what's happening, you only have to change it once. So with that being said, Tom, I know you use Debug.Assert. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and with an eye on the time, I'll keep it brief. Debug.Assert is one of my friends that I use a lot. Kim said, you need to be humble enough to understand that you make mistakes, and Debug.Assert helps me catch them. It is not a substitute for error handling, or it's not a substitute for writing code to alert the end user about something, but it is when you're building code. One example is we have a radio button group with 3 radio buttons. And we have code that says, if the value is 1, do this. If the value is 2, do that, right? A case statement, case 1, 2, 3. I write a case else, and it says debug.assert false. And what that would do, only when you are in debug mode, not when you're running an AccDE. So only when you're running AccDB, the code will stop there because the expression evaluates to false. And it will tell you that you just chose something in the radio button group that is not 1 of 2 or 3. You already have code for that, but this is a case else situation. So that is one example. So that tells you that, oh yeah, I did add a 4th radio button, but I forgot to write the code. Another example is where we might test, we might have some functions and procedures in modules, and they are kind of general purpose, and we would use Debug.Assert to test the incoming parameters. Is this value one that the rest of the code expects? You know, we don't want to deal with negative values here. We don't want to deal with things that are out of range. We don't want to deal with null values, empty strings, whatever it is. And the code will stop there if you use Debug.Assert, and then you will realize that, hey, I'm calling this procedure in a way that it was not designed to be called. Then you can decide what to do. Either the calling code would have to be changed, or the procedure itself would have to be made more powerful so that we can accept nulls or whatever unusual situations. So that's where I use that. Debug.print is nice, but Debug.Assert takes the crown there, I think. All right, moving right along. I think we already made this point, but I'm going to make it one more time, 2 more times. Doing nothing has a cost. This application works just fine. Leave it alone. That can come back to bite you. Right here, February 13, 2024. One of those applications that was left alone. One, I should say thousands of applications that were left alone, stopped working. There was an update to the old classic SQL Server ODBC driver that caused the interactions to be with the database to be extremely slow. I mean, people went from instantaneous to minutes. And that didn't happen to me because all my applications are using SQL Server ODBC 18 drivers that are the current version that Microsoft is still actively developing. Yes, there are sometimes updates to the old driver, but the real work is being done in the new ODBC drivers. And yes, that will be something that you need to keep up with. It's just one example where doing nothing has a cost. All of a sudden, this application doesn't work anymore. I wish we had upgraded. Second one is the week number issue. You have written code using DatePart, for example, to get the week number of the current day. There's a long-standing bug in Windows. It actually goes back to one of the Windows DLLs that causes this function to return 53, where it should be week 1. Unfortunate if you didn't know about it, but you know, as a professional developer, monitoring the various forums, etc., you eventually become aware of this, and you say, that is not going to happen to me. So you either follow the advice given in this article, or what I decided to do, and I've done for a long time, is I create a table of my own. So rather than using code to calculate the week number, I have a table with dates. It has all the dates from 2020 to 50 years in the future. And I one time carefully populate that with the correct values. And you can see how we might have, for one particular day, we may have very many different ways that we want to display it, and that here the last 2 columns have week numbers in there. We make sure that they are all correct, not just for 1 year, but for all the 50 years. And this kind of date table is actually a great way to write fast code. Too much to talk about that now, but highly recommended. Sometimes called a tally table. It can be very powerful and very performant.
Okay, so I see we're getting near the end of our time, so I'll briefly try to go through this. So when you take over someone's project, it can happen one of two ways. You're a consultant, and that consultant has moved on or chose to do something else, and you're now stepping in. Or you work at a company and someone gets leaves, moves, whatever happens, and now you're going to have to take over their project. How do you begin to try to understand what's even happening in the project? So first, you want to just look at the database design, look at the tables, look at the relationships. Is there referential integrity? What's happening here? So that you have some understanding. Because without the data, your application doesn't really mean anything. So I usually start with the database. Look at some of the code. What's the quality? Where's it at? You need to understand what you're about to walk into, whether you have a choice or not. You still need to understand where you're at, and you need to set your expectations with whoever senior leadership is on this. Like, there's things we're going to have to fix or things we need to change, I think, and this is what we need to do. You should also look at using tools to try to help you in this assessment, and tools that you can use to bring it up to standards, whatever your standards are, which kind of leads to, you need to understand what your own professional standards are. What will you compromise on, and what will you not compromise on? So again, I talked about using the access object model and learning what you can by dumping things out quickly and getting an overview, and then you can look into things more deeply, but to give you a sense of what's going on. And then again, communication with project sponsors, stakeholders, SMEs, setting goals, expectations, budgets. Sometimes when you have a job, you don't get an opportunity to do that if you're a full-time employee versus you're coming in as a contractor. And Tom has a real world scenario of getting a client and doing an assessment. And I'll let you, I'm not going to steal your thunder.
This client called us about a month ago, and this is what they are using. They're running Microsoft Fox Pro 2.6 from 1994 on Windows XP. So when I heard that, it was like, I talked to our salesperson and I said, well, first thing we need to find out is, are they dinosaurs and do they want to stay that way? Or are they dinosaurs and they have seen the light and they want to come into the 21st century? That's the only question that I really need to get answered right now. I don't want to know what the application is, how complex it is, how much money they have. Because if it is number one, if they want to stay this way, then we will gracefully decline to work on this project. If it is a scenario where, let's say, they finally see the light that Windows XP is just not going to work very much longer, or the son or daughter is taking over the company and finally there's a new wind here and there's a need to basically set this aside and rewrite this, then we can talk. And so that is part of what I use as my professional standards and where I can compromise or not. And in this particular case, it's like, there's no way I'm going to work on Fox Pro 2.6. There's not enough time in the day to make that an enjoyable experience. So just a little anecdote about how you should always be evaluating your projects and where you feel that you can make the most impact. All right, Kim, you had a really nice end here because you have been in this situation. So I want you to tell us about this story. Yeah.
Okay. So when your application has production errors or something happens, people lose confidence in you and in the application that you've built. If you can't answer what just happened, how did it happen, why did it go wrong, what are we going to do to fix it, how long is it going to take for us to fix it, and then what are we going to do long term to make sure that this sort of error cannot occur again. I worked in a company where we had two owners. One was extremely excitable. So for him, getting a paper cut, needing 2 stitches, or having someone pull your arm out of its socket completely, were all equal in his drama level. So they were very excitable. If I walked in and said, okay, X happened, this is where it happened, this is how we can remediate, we can get the data back, we have a backup from last night, it should take about 45 minutes, and we'll put it back, and we'll be back on track wherever it is we're supposed to go. Then you offer up a time. I will check back in with you within the 45 minutes to tell you if we're done, unless, and you say this to the head stakeholders in all of this, unless you want to meet more frequently, I will get back to you on where we're at. Are we still on target for it'll be back within the 45 minutes or not? Suddenly everybody takes a big breath because someone's taken control of the situation, who's accepted, I will be the responsible party, I will be the contact point, here's what we're going to do, and then you sit back and then you do the assessment. That's really what matters. If I got money every time somebody says to me, I didn't do anything, the computer's just doing stuff, I would be one of the richest people on the planet. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And as soon as you can turn around and go, well, you didn't do it, but so-and-so did it. And that's why it looks this way, because we're tracking all of the and auditing all of the changes that are happening to the data. So the computer didn't do it. Mary did it, or Jeff did it, or Bob did it, or whoever it was. And this is how the process worked. Once you can explain it, everyone feels good about it. So the last thing that I implemented, because I came into the company and people would be lined up outside my door the day after a production release happened. And I'd be like, what is going on? Like, we did all these testing tickets. How is this happening? And I enlisted ultimately I realized that everybody just tested their one ticket, but we hadn't come up with a process that says, what is mission critical in this application? Because this single application supported 8 different departments in the company, because the data kind of flowed from one to the other. So it was one big app. So I had the head of each one of those departments work with their own team. It was not for the developers or for me to do this. It's their responsibility. And I want you to chart out how, once we've gone through and done all of the tickets, how are you going to confirm that the application still works and that you will not have any sort of an error happen that means you're all dead in the water and there's no work going on because we didn't test something. And it took a little time, but by the time we got to, we were releasing about every 6 to 8 weeks, maybe every 4. By the time we'd gotten through a few of those, they had beautiful documentation, better than anything I would have produced. They ran through those test scripts and they had to say to me, yes, this release can go everything for our department that is mission critical, not like I'd like this field to be moved over 2 inches. Mission critical works. And suddenly all the drama on release days was over. So they were confident. They used it to train and test new employees. They put them in charge of doing the sign-off scripts. It all worked out great for everyone. So the bottom line is, you have to be the one who is calm and who can explain what has happened, how you're going to fix it, how long is it going to take, what are we going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again once we've gotten the business back moving, and then how long is that going to take? And everyone says, okay, great, somebody's in charge and somebody's going to handle this, and you need to be that person.
Right. Yes. And all the things that we've mentioned here today kind of build up to, being able to have these kind of applications that you can be proud of and where you can respond quickly for good outcomes. Okay, George, that's our presentation.
Well, thank you very much. That was wonderful, fantastic. I just want to make a comment that because I worked with Tom and Kim on the Northwind 2 template project, I got to witness firsthand this process in action as they went through and worked on that application. So I can say for sure everything they said is valid and been tested, and I watched it firsthand. So
Thank you, George. That's very nice.
Yeah. Crystal had some questions about the update channels and review, switching from channel to channel. I tried to put some information out of the Access Forever article on that. So if you can try that out and see if that works. There are some other recommendations in there. Peter Doering and forget, it was either, I think it was Peter and Carl probably were the principal authors on that article on working with channel switching for updates. So
And there is more than one way, and not every way works in every scenario. That's what I was kind of hinting at when I spoke about it. So just like everything else, practice.
Yeah, the part that I copied into the chat was option 3 out of, and I think there are 4 altogether. So yeah, Tom's exactly right.
Yeah.
And
And also, if you have a larger organization, you need to be able to push that to all the users and say the whole company is going back one version, not just one individual workstation, and then we'll walk to the next one and start typing for 10 minutes. Hopefully there is a way with at the server level to push these kinds of changes out. And that's at the edge of what most software developers would feel comfortable with, but working together with other IT people, you could get that accomplished.
Yeah, teamwork is critical.
Right.
So are there any other questions, comments about the presentation before I stop the recording? Okay, well, I'll turn off the recording and give people a chance to take a quick refreshment break, and appreciate your being here with us tonight. Hope you found something worthwhile. I certainly did again.